Kislev, the frozen lands to the north of the empire and home of the Ice Queen Tsarina Katerine, is a land of stalwart defenders and acts as the first bastion against encroaching hordes from the Chaos Wastes. From the many incursions of chaos such as Asavar Kul and Erengrad Sword to the internal struggles that have broken out across the cultural groups that make up the realm of the Ice Queen, Kislev is a land constantly beset. Extending from the Troll Country in the west to the far side colonies across the World's Edge Mountains in the east, Kislev is no small nation, and its borders have acted as a great filter to the empire for centuries. Games Workshop's new tabletop foray, The Old World, has reimagined these borders to the extent of greatly extending the borders of the far side colonies in the east. But keep in mind, The Old World is supposed to be set 300 or so years before the timeline of Karl Franz's reign, and even before the Great War against Chaos, so things might have shifted again since then. And in this video today, I want to discuss the cities and towns that make up Kislev. We've done similar videos leading up to the launch of Total War Warhammer 2 with both the High Elves and the Dark Elves. So, with Warhammer 3 coming out, I'd like to give Kislev that same treatment because there's a lot of fun information to unfold here. We'll be discussing the three primary cities first, then going into some other notable smaller locations or holdings of the nation of Kislev. Not a ton of information on them, but just enough to kind of wet your beak. But as always, you can quickly navigate to any point in the video that interests you the most by utilizing the chapters in the timeline and the description. Before we get started though, if you have not yet pre-ordered Total War Warhammer 3, feel free to use the Nexus store link in my description. They get keys directly from the developer, and it's a great way to support the channel. Lastly, if you're enjoying learning about the vodka-swigging bros of Kislev, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It's always annoying to hear, but trust me when I say it helps any content creator you watch out a ton. But let's dive in on the lore of the cities of Kislev. And we'll open up with the capital of the nation and the seat of power within the realm, the capital city of Kislev. To understand the beginnings of Kislev City and its early foundations, we have to understand the origins of the peoples of the realm itself. Each one of the major human empires, let's just look at Bretonnia, Empire, and Kislev for this example, are all descendants of one of the nomadic human tribes that filled what we now call the Old World. The Empire is a smattering of tribes such as the Teutonians, the Burgundians, and what have you, but Sigmar himself was a member of the Unburosian tribe, and the grand uniting force behind the Empire. The Bretonnians were a tribe of men called the Bretoni that migrated to the west to found their lands, fighting hordes of orcs before being united under Gilles le Breton. And then we have Kislev. Kislev, before it was a kingdom, was a land filled by the Ungals primarily, and then the Ostrogoths and Eudotuses in the west. From the east came a huge wave of nomadic horse people known as the Gospodars, descendants of the ancient Scythians. If all these names sound familiar, they're supposed to be parallels to our own history of the Ponto-Caspian steppe and the Hunnic tribes' western migrations and invasions. The Gospodars founded the city of Kislev within the newly named realm of Kislev under their Khan queen Mishka, the first of the Ice Queens of Kislev. The Gospodars would go on to represent the ruling portion of the society of the realm. All of the royal lines descend from Gospodar blood, as well as many of the governors of the more important settlements of the land. And you have to remember, the name Kislev is a reference to the deity known as the Ancient Widow, who whispered to the shamans of the Gospodar to come free her from the lands of ice far to the west. I believe it translates to the land, the word Kislev. Lore Master of Sotek just did a great video on this subject, so please go and check out his video. He just put it up a couple days ago. But moving back to Kislev as the capital city, even its origins are humble. Once an elven colony named Athel Numiel, destroyed in the War of Vengeance or War of the Beard, whichever side you sit on, it became the Ungal trading city of Pelsberg, nestled upon the river Erskoy. In a bit of foreshadowing, Pelsberg would be attacked multiple times throughout its some 2,000-year history, but always come back just as strong, such as the way of the people of the north. In the latter years of its existence, though, it was renamed to Dorogo, after a prominent war leader, before eventually being destroyed and rebuilt as Kislev when the mass migrating Gospodars took over. Mishka could see the already abundant trade that was coming into Pelsberg from the dwarfs and prominent locales of the empire, so it acted as a perfect location for the capital of her new kingdom and seat of power. The capital city houses some of the most important landmarks of the culture of its peoples, and we'll talk about a few of those now. And when you look through the Warhammer RPG books, which act as the source for the majority of the topics in this video, you get a lot of nuance that is divulged to us. From the Winter Gardens, the Gardens of Moor, the Hanging Fountain, Temple of Verena, pretty much every major and minor location is marked out for us, but we'll instead just hit the more prominent ones, or at least ones that might act as unique buildings in the campaign or mentions in possible events or dilemmas. The city itself is divided into 5 districts: the Learned Quarter, Middle District, Wealthy District, Docklands, and the Merchants' Quarters. They all have Kislevite names, but I'm just not going to butcher the pseudo-Russian names any more than I already am throughout this video. They're there for you to look at, but I will not even attempt it. But surrounding these districts are the Grand Walls of Kislev, and the first landmark you'd see approaching the city, as they are imposing, grim, and stark, just like their creators. The Gora Giroev, see, just butchered it, acts as the large hill in which Kislev was built upon, the red soil marking it out as a clear contrast to the dour land it inhabits. The Hill of Heroes, as it is named, leads to the cobbled causeway that leads across a bridge and before the doors of a massive gate, one of 4 that marks the entrance into the capital city. Here's an excerpt from the Ambassador Chronicles from Black Library about the walls. The city rises from the oblast like a jagged spike on the landscape, dominating the countryside around it in a vulgar fashion that is only to be expected of this rude nation. The walls are high and impressive, to be sure, but how high must a wall be before it becomes unnecessary? It seems that these Kislevites have built their walls higher than any I've ever seen, and the effect is, though impressive, somewhat gauche for my taste. Machicolations were cunningly wrought within the decorative gargoyles at the wall head, and smoke curled lazily upwards from prepared braziers on the ramparts. The precise construction of the protruding towers and gatehouse ensured that every yard of rocky ground before the walls was a killing zone, covered by crossbows and cannon fire. So you can see how this imposing wall can be a very direct representation of the ability for Kislev to land the test of countless invasions, right? To kind of just stand through all of that. The bottom of said wall was sort of waxy. It kind of had this weird waxy look to it. And the common belief is that this was left over from the Great War with Chaos, when sorcerers tried to turn the base of the wall to molten lava. And there's a lot of mystery around the lands of Kislev from outsiders, and most of the documentation about these lands are from outsiders, which is important to note. Take a look at the wording in the excerpt we just looked at. There's a certain level of disdain from the other realms of men, so it clearly makes for a marked contrast between the many empires out there. It also helps to paint a clear and defining picture of how each race of man is different in the Warhammer world. And here's what some eyewitnesses have said about Kislev.
Bah, all that chaos makes them mad. Who would want to live there anyway? The summers are cold, the winters are freezing, and if the nomads don't kill you, the marauders will. I tell you, they're welcome to the place.
They have courage, I'll give them that, but it's a wild courage, untempered by discipline that's beaten into men by drill sergeants like me. Give me a month and I'll have them marching like respectable Empire soldiers.
And neither the climate, manners, nor diversions of the place suit either my health or temper, and only the pleasures I may indulge in are eating and drinking. Yet Sigmar knows I have scarce toasted worse in my time here as an ambassador of our noble emperor than anywhere else.
Hope you enjoy those cheesy little readings. Different, but fun. Moving through the gates, though, the first feature you would be struck by would be the towering white stone towers and colorfully festooned battlements of the Boca Palace that stretch tier upon tier into the sky, dominating the landscape with golden onion domes capping each tower. Swirling ice magic would shimmer and wisp about the outside of the castle, projecting the majesty and mysticism of Kislev for all to behold. The Winter Palace is the home of the Ice Queen Katarine herself, and acts as a reminder of the terrifying might of ice magic that quelled the lands in the centuries prior under the Gospodars. The citizenry of Kislev is not permitted entrance into the large, spanning compound of the Kreml, except for one day out of the year, where they may gather in the winter gardens and receive gifts from their benevolent matriarch. The interior of the palace is a frigid but intricately crafted building of carved and inlaid walls marked out by even more elaborately carved columns. A large marble hall greets any visitors to the palace, with sweeping marble stairways leading further up into the Ice Queen's abode. Grand vaulted ceilings give way to beautiful mosaics portraying some of the pivotal moments of Kislevite history, such as the coronation of Igor the Terrible. As befitting the name, the walls and floor are all made of pure ice, and a large part of the structure is dedicated to the Gallery of Heroes, the massive wing of the palace that shows paintings of all the czars of Kislev, history preserved quite literally in ice. The gallery is one of 3 parts of the wing. Another leads to a section meant for sparring and entertainment when hosting guests, and the other is a large semicircular room reserved for dining. Throughout the entire palace are rugs and tapestries from as far off as Bretonia, Tilia, and Astalia, adding to the decadence and opulence of the Great Boca Palace. But now that we've talked about the seat of power, let's swing over to the Chekist building, which lies just outside of the campus that makes up the Kreml on the south side of the Geryoyev Square. Geryoyev Square. Now, this isn't just a building, it's a fortress with a huge wall that cuts it off from the rest of the city. A single entrance with a heavy black gate acting as the only means to enter the headquarters of Kislev's Grand Spy Network and the Tsarina's secret police. The Chekists are essentially the KGB of Kislev. It's the easiest way to put it. You get put in a black bag and disappear from the city, and the lore even outright states that anyone that enters the building is known as quote-unquote disappeared, and will in all likelihood never be seen alive again. The fortress, while nondescript in name and, well, description, is just a house of carnage. Blood spattered all over the walls, very little light, the smell of blood and human waste fills the air. It's just not a happy place. There have been countless visitors to the headquarters, and very few of them make it out alive, or to tell of what they've seen. The Chekists dedicate their time to ensuring the security of Kislev, rooting out any corruption and controlling through fear and an appeal to patriotism. I would imagine that the Chekists will play a prominent place in the campaign of Kislev. At the very least, they would possibly act as a hero unit for the faction, providing public order bonuses when deployed, quote unquote, and giving the ability to assassinate, much like the Witch Hunter does for the Empire. Similar roles, after all, only the Chekists are a bit more extreme. Even further, I see Kislev as the starting location for Tsarina Katarine in the campaign for Kislev. And we'll talk more about the actual campaign map at the end and how I see it envisioned, but I think this makes the most sense. In the CG trailer, she was out on an expedition, and in the gameplay at the Brass Citadel, her faction name was Katarine's Expedition. So her presence in the capital city might only be something we see in the Grand Mortal Empires campaign of all 3 games combined. Perhaps the Warhammer 3 exclusive campaign will be more relegated to the frontier on the east of the World's Edge Mountains. But until we learn more, I think it stands to reason that Kislev the city will house Katarine, much like Altdorf houses Karl Franz. Now, as we head north out of the Za Gate of Kislev, we traverse the road further upwards beyond Ardka and east of Beleva to the location at Erzebia. This prominent location is one of the holiest sites in the entire realm of Kislev, and it is said it is the location that the great bear god Ursun took a bite out of the world, leaving some of his teeth behind, creating a massive valley that translates to Ursun's teeth. Erzebia is one of the nexus points of a network of ley lines carrying Kislev's ice magic, capped by ancient menhir or alms. The Ice Witches believe the loss of these sites will diminish and perhaps even taint their ice magic, so they do anything to protect them. Erzebia is the burial place for many of the greatest heroes of the kingdom, and it is revered among the people of Kislev. In the Storm of Chaos supplement, there was a titanic battle fought between High Czar Elfric Sinwolf of the Iron Wolves Warriors of Chaos and a Dragon Ogre against a coalition of Kislevite, Imperial, and Tillian soldiers. Such is the power of this place that Katarine was able to call upon a spectral army of warriors to defeat this chaos army. It's like the Return of the King in Warhammer. Further north from here, the most sacred of locations of Kislev, we have the most damned of them, the furthest northern major settlement in the kingdom, Praag. The great bastion of the north stands vigilant against the northern chaos wastes, as both the largest and most heavily fortified location in the eastern oblast. Praag acts as the first point of defense against any of the larger invasions into Kislev. Unlike most of the other cities of Kislev, Praag is the oldest city in the kingdom, as it was built by the Ungol lords long before the Gospodars invaded from the east, and it still houses one of the largest populations of Ungols. Praag is also uniquely located, being the first or last major city, depending on which direction you're going, into the high pass that leads through the World's Edge Mountains. As thus, Praag has seen a great deal of prosperity as a trade hub, being nicknamed the Silver City before its darker history caught up to it. Specializing in crafted luxuries and ornamentations, gold, silver, and copper adornments, lavish clothing, elaborate jewelry, all manner of finery comes pouring out of the northern settlement. Further still, exotic goods from Cathay make their way into the bazaars and trading arena of Praag, where fine spices, jade, and ivory all find their way into the rest of the kingdom or further into the empire or even westward. With this wealth also came a proud military because, as stated, Prague's northern location leaves it vulnerable to attacks and raids from the Chaos Wastes. From this comes the stalwart defense of a city constantly beset. Before Prague's fall, which we'll get to, it had two layers of defense. The first wall was a huge, viciously spiked wall called the Basta, which means stop in Italian, ironically enough. A yard deeper is a secondary wall with murder holes littered between to deter invaders. Both of these walls are tall and imposing, as well as adorned with dwarfen runes of protection that contain ancient magic. You thought there were enough walls? You were wrong. There's another set of walls that surround the original city of Prague, known as the Old Town. Then, on top of that, stands a massive cannon-studded fortress that looks out across the city with its sneering cannons poised for any invasion. Through all of this, you have a very diverse cultural background to the city. A Gospodar ruler, Ungol boyars, or nobles, oblast folk, mixed with steppe nomads, empire wizards, ogres, traders from Cathay, even vampires, some say. It's one of the more racially diverse settlements within the kingdom. The peoples and walls of Prague have outlasted siege after siege, each one taking a heavier toll upon the city, destroying buildings, toppling walls, but still the people of Prague rebuild. Until the Great War of Chaos and the gigantic army of Asavar Kul. The last ever chosen prior to Archeon chose Prague as the first target for his conquest of the south. The defenders of Prague held out for weeks, the twisted followers of Chaos piling at the foot of the Basta until they stacked up to the top of the ramparts. Over time, the forces of Chaos supported by Kolek Suneater won out, their limitless legion taking the city. After the Great War was won and the armies from the south recaptured Prague, the entire city was burned to the ground to try and wipe away the taint of chaos that deeply rooted itself into the very earth beneath the once grand Silver City. Walls had sprouted massive eyes and tongues. Men and silver melted into one. Severed fingers rained from above. It was like the entire city was owned by an absentee landlord that won't ever respond to your texts about that noise you keep hearing in the night that you swear to God is someone being murdered. Well, maybe not really, but it was bad. But through all of this, such is the determination of the people of Prague, they still returned to their forsaken city and aimed to rebuild it anew. Prague has taken on a new title, The Cursed City, as structures have a haphazard look to them, with structures widely unfinished, repairs abandoned here and there, as more invasions have happened over the last 200 years since the rebuilding of the city. Still, the people persist though. The once quiet opera house has reopened, the traders continue to ply their trade, albeit at a reduced amount. The boyars throw lavish feasts, as lavish as their meager supplies can allow for, and life goes on in the Cursed City. Just like Kislev, Prague is divided into 4 districts: the Old Town, the Noble Quarter, Merchant Quarter, and the West Side. The latter being the trendiest part of town, where everyone wears suspenders and talks about their screenplays they're writing. Oh wait, sorry, that's LA. But Prague is filled with plenty of interesting landmarks throughout it, but 2 really stick out. One is the Deep City, or Globograd. This is a series of catacombs that run underneath the city, namely the Citadel and Old Town, built by the dwarf population very long ago. These catacombs would act as a final defense in the event of a protracted siege. Unfortunately, these catacombs were never used, but in there reside great war machines and sorceress defenses in the deep vaults underneath the city. Food storage, means of providing sun and water to the inhabitants, and other devices. One of the ice witches of a distant Ungol ruler even built a great laboratory below, discovering a source of dark magic deep under the city. Most of that is legend, and with the destruction of the city during the Great War, the entries to the Deep City have been lost, and with it, many secrets held within. The second location, though, is the famous, or perhaps ominous, Fire Spire. This tower, located in about the center of the city, was a place of great learning for ice witches, hags, and even wizards from the Empire. The Fire Spire was originally Kislev's College of Magics, built by Zra Rudolph II to attract spellcasters from all over. To quote the 2nd edition RPG further, wizardry was encouraged also. In the days before the colleges of magic in Altdorf, Prague was a center of the old world for magical and alchemical experimentation, and many legends are told of strange spells working amongst its streets. And it had even drawn so much etheric power from all the practitioners within that the top of the tower swirled and cascaded with flames, arcs of frost fire, and alchemical explosions. And this led to the tower gaining its name by the common folk, the Fire Spire. The ice witches and hags had warned against such a gathering of energy in one locale, which eventually proved wise, as during the Great War, it was a beacon for the twisting energies of chaos. The sorcerers of Asavar Kul's army corrupted the tower, causing the top 2 stories to explode. And to this day, it is a haunted and foreboding place. Anyone that enters does not exit. So fell are the magics that have corrupted the tower that no spell casting is allowed within the city walls, meaning there are practically 0 ice witches, although hags still find their way to the city, believing that there is a deep power that lies under the spire, suspecting that it is the ancient widow herself watching over the city from below. Because of the failure of the Fire Spire and it leaving the people of Prague open to an attack from within via its explosion and corruption, the people of Kislev have shunned the traditional use of magic, seeing it as wild and uncontrollable. Ice magic is the only widely permitted and even valued magical pursuit in the realm, as it is deeply ingrained in the culture of the people via the ancient widow herself and the many ice queens that created the kingdom. The other magic is more shamanistic with the hags, but this helps to explain why there is such a limited use of the other winds of magic in Kislev. There are many more landmarks in the city though, like the haunted opera house and its thriving operatic society, the mutant-infested sewers of the city, the large area of dead space called the Bleakness, where the dead they don't really fully rest. I say it like I'm trying to sell you on coming to this great place, like it's Hawaii or something, but it's not a fun place. It should come at no surprise, though, that with such a cursed city, the undead have also made it their home. There are 3 vampire families that rule in secret over the city of Prague. Perhaps not directly, but they pull the strings and tinker with the machinations of the city for over the last 20 years. So much so that they believe themselves to be the rightful rulers and protectors of Prague. In the book Ulrika Bloodforged, we get a Lamian vampire, Evgenia, who sees herself as the mistress of the entire city. Ulrika becomes indebted to her and swears a vow of loyalty, but outside of the RPG books, this is where we get to really peer into the vampiric deadliness, or denizens, I guess you could say, of the city. And 3 more prominent families have even infiltrated the great boyar families of the city: the Uperanovs, the Vasilikovs, and the I keep wanting to say Kalashnikovs, but it's Kalashniviks. The Vasilikovs have see themselves as descendants of Vashanesh, a gentleman you might know by the name of Vlad von Karstein. The Kalashniviks are Lamian vampires, all descended from the crazed Katarine the Bloody, vampire Tsarina of Kislev. Now, Prague won't be the starting location of any legendary lord we know of at this point in time, but would be a really interesting place for a future DLC edition of Ulrika Straghoff, the famous Kislev Lamian vampire we just talked about. I've speculated plenty about her being a really awesome candidate for a hybrid undead Kislev faction, but could also start in another location, and I'll get into that later. And again, I say that this won't be the starting location because there's no one I could think of that could start here. The Rasputin leaked character, this could be his city because, you know, he is this high patriarch of Ursun, and this might be the place that he starts because he doesn't really get along with Katarine from what we've heard so far from Andy Hall, so this could be the location that he starts in. I think that's anything starting here would be cursed, and I don't think it as a high patriarch of Ursun as a cursed individual. But either way, Prague is an important piece of the Kislev puzzle as it is that first bastion against chaos. And despite many attempts at secession from Kislev from the former Ungol leaders, it remains one of the most important cities in the entire kingdom. Moving far to the west now, on the coast of the Sea of Claws lies the grand city of Erengrad, the doorway to Kislev. Rivaling Marienburg as the second biggest trading port in the northern Old World, Erengrad is one of the most important cities in the kingdom as a means of commerce and trade. It's also the city that most Old Worlders would find themselves in, with districts dedicated to the Empire, Elves, and other races having a strong presence throughout the city. Founded by the Ungols as Norvard, or kind of sounds like Novgorod, right? It was the former capital of the tribe before the conquest of the Gospodars. It was conquered by Tsarina Shoika, Mishka's daughter, who realized the huge commercial benefit as a gateway to trade and continued prosperity for the budding kingdom of Kislev. Renamed Erengrad, the city flourished, attracting traders from across the empire and even the elves of Ulthuan. Of course, with any port city, you get plenty of more nefarious characters, with pirates and the such inhabiting the docks to ply their trade and establish dubious contacts. Despite the reputation of being a rougher city, attracting more scum and villainy than Mos Eisley, Erengrad did indeed prosper. The guilds that run the trade and import and export of various goods, some of which are hardly legal, pay the boyars handsome bribes to keep them far from their dealings. And with this, the guilds have become a strong power fulcrum in the city, where it would originally be the boyars ruling over portions of it, the guilds instead have free reign. While the boyars are being paid, they stay out of the meddlings of the guild. Even further, since the capital receives plenty of tax money and further trade inwards to the kingdom, no one is ever sent to investigate the dealings of Erengrad. It's a perfectly corrupt system. The city itself is divided into 3 parts: the ports, the low city, which houses all the poorer folk, and the high city, where the wealthy boyars and guild leaders rule over the rest of the city from. As mentioned earlier, the city is insanely diverse, and as such, there's a quarter from so many different races. The Tilian quarter, the Bretonnian quarter, Empire quarter, and the Elven quarter, with plenty of temples to both the Kislevite gods like Ursun and the Empire pantheon like Shalaya and Manan. If Prague represents a melting pot of a lot of the cultures of Kislev, Erengrad represents that of the many different races and religions of the world. Just like the capital city of Kislev, there is also a large presence of ice witches in Erengrad. Obviously, it pales in comparison to the majesty of the capital, but Frostholm is exactly what it sounds like, the home of the Ice Witches within Erengrad. This glittering tower stands just inside the city walls and is looked at with awed reverence by the citizens within, seen as a marvel of magic as the gleaming tower of pure ice stands relentless in the face of the shining sun. The Ice Witches of Erengrad have earned a great place of honor, though, among the populace, many of their number losing their lives in the defense of the city during the Great Chaos War. As such, the Ice Witches are admired for their power and bravery among the common folk of Erengrad. On the other side of town, within the High City and on the bank of the Lynsk River, lies the Elven Quarter. This quarter was the largest quarter of High Elves in any city outside of Marienburg, which, should come at no surprise since Marienburg was once a very important elf trading colony. Either way, the Elves of Erengrad have made it their home for many generations, and in the Storm of Chaos supplement that was unfortunately retconned, there was this epic last stand between the half of the elves that remained within the city after they were recalled to Ulthuan. The elves that stayed fought shoulder to shoulder with the people of Erengrad. Unfortunately, they were all slaughtered, and this was later carried over to the end times by Graham McNeil in his Kislev short story With Ice and Sword. Outside of that, though, the elves continue to trade goods out of the Elven Quarter and maintain a strong current of elven influence within Erengrad, possibly hinting at a presence of Seaguard or elven mages in some fashion for Warhammer 3. Not so sure, but I'd like to see at least starting with the ability to open up diplomacy with other races in the grander campaign map, since there is such a huge amount of, racial diversity within Erengrad. I think it would make a lot of sense. But moving into the Low City, the last location I want to talk about in Erengrad is the Cannoneers Compound, probably one of the largest and most imposing structures in the Low City. Erengrad is one of the few places outside of Nuln in the Old World where cannons are manufactured by humans, supplying lighter cannons to ships that ply the hazardous Sea of Claws. Not as high quality as those made in Nuln, Erengrad cannons were substantially cheaper and lighter, better suited for seagoing vessels. A few mercenary companies also use Erengrad cannons on land. Erengrad is also the birthplace of the Streltsy, originally formed from a rota of Kossars under the eccentric empire-obsessed boyar Boyadnov. The Streltsy are the foremost masters of firearms in Kislev. Weapons once viewed with fear and suspicion. They were actually outright, they never wanted to use them. Soldiers from across Kislev traveled to Erengrad to train with the Streltsy. And what's interesting about the Streltsy in the lore is that they're wielding gigantic poleaxes, berdish to be exact, different from the Kossars' traditional two-handed axes. Now, as we all know in Total War Warhammer 3, the Streltsy are much heavier armored than the original counterparts and the Kossars, and they have a handgun with a large axe blade on the butt of the gun. This would be an example of Games Workshop overwriting the lore of the Streltsy, and something that will probably become canon in the Old World, or at least I would assume. It's just an interesting bit of information, as almost every unit that we've seen so far is pretty much true to the pre-existing lore, for the exception of the new Ice Chariot things we saw in the Kislev CG trailer, and of course these Streltsy. And we'll have to wait to see if there's a transition point where they move from the Berdish to this handgun axe hybrid. Now, there are plenty of other settlements within Kislev. There's Chernovstra, which is essentially Warhammer Chernobyl, having been destroyed by a plague and completely abandoned. It's known as the Colony of Black Fortunes. There's also a dark citadel in the center of Lake Zran Urzkul on the new Old World Kislev map. So that could be a possible location for the place of the future Chernovstra. There's also Fort Strahov, the ancestral home of Ulrika Strahov, and where her father, Ivan Strahov, the March Warden and Boyar of the Northern Oblast, resides. This could be a starting location for Ulrika if she does end up becoming a playable character for Kislev. And if you can't tell, since I brought it up so much, I definitely want to see that happen. Outside of that, there's the east side colonies on the other end, the far side colonies on the other end of the World's Edge Mountains, Volksgrad and Bolgasgard, plenty of other minor settlements that are still important, but nothing is quite as important as the three we've talked about today. One thing I said I wanted to discuss before closing the video out is how the campaign map might possibly look, taking these cities into consideration. And by looking at all of these maps of Kislev, I think that for the main campaign map of Warhammer 3, I could easily see Erengrad being the furthest west portion of the map, giving the northern Chaos Wastes a presence before the map pans east over the World's Edge Mountains, going into the Darklands with the Mountains of Morn and Cathay on the furthest eastern region. The issue is that it sort of makes for an awkward western border to the map. So there's a possibility that the map sort of tapers south, extending to some of the dwarfen holds along the mountains range to encompass a lot of the World's Edge Mountains. Of course, they might just completely cut Kislev out of the map, and Katerine might be represented in strictly the colonies on the other side of the mountains from the main kingdom. This would make for a much neater map, but take out a lot of the flavor of the main cities of the realm. So I'm really curious to see how they hit this, and hopefully we'll get more information soon, because I think everyone's really hankering to see how the map will shake out for both Warhammer 3's campaign and the Grand Mortal Empires map, which I've dubbed the Immortal Empires map. And that brings our video, though, to a close here, guys. Let me know in the comment section below if you'd like to hear more about the minor settlements of Kislev, and I can do an extension of this video about them. But I did this for some of the other races, and there's so much lore that has been divulged in the Warhammer RPG books that makes exploring these cities a lot of fun. So thank you so much for watching here today. Don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, all that action. But as always, have a good one, and take care.